Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. I'm Susan Cheka-Lusignan, Director of Marketing and Program Development for the Friends and Foundation of the Rochester Public Library. We welcome you to the final review in our spring series of books sandwiched in. We ask that you please silence your cell phones at this time. Our thanks go to those who help fund programs like these through FFRPL, the dedicated FFRPL committee members who curate and organize these events, our guest speakers and artists who so graciously share their time and talents with us, the library staff who help with our setup and production, and the thousands of people who attend each year. We are live streaming the formal portion of today's program to the library's YouTube channel. If you need to access the induction loop service in the auditorium, please adjust your hearing aid to the T switch. FFRPL raises funds, presents programs, supports special projects, helps to create specialized spaces, and purchases supplemental materials and equipment for the Rochester Public Library. We're going to give you an example from each category. Fundraising, of course, is a cornerstone of our mission. FFRPL is grateful to be selected for the Target Circle Community Giving Program. Now through June 30th, Target Circle members can earn and cast votes for local nonprofits, including FFRPL, online, through their mobile app, and at Target stores in Western New York. You vote and Target sends us a check. There is no additional cost to Target Circle members, and we ask that you please vote for FFRPL. Details are at ffrpl.org. We, of course, present programs such as today's BSI Review and our annual Sokol High School Literary Awards. The awards ceremony and reception will be held Thursday, April 25th at 4 p.m. here in this auditorium. FFRPL is a founding sponsor of the annual Art of the Book and Paper exhibit. The deadline for entries for the next show is May 15th. Artists can complete their online entry at rockcitylibrary.org, and FFRPL is proud to help fund, present, and promote this special project now in its 13th year. FFRPL helps organize and fund murals at Central and throughout the branch libraries on an ongoing basis. The most recent two specialized spaces include Sean Dunwoody's new portrait of Frederick Douglass at the Frederick Douglass branch in late 2023, and new interior murals at the Wheatley branch just installed this past month. For the last 5 years, FFRPL has purchased New York State Empire passes for every MCLS library, central, branches, and towns. You can borrow your Empire passes with your library card. These supplemental materials provide free access at New York State parks and the State Department of Environmental Conservation, including forests, beaches, and trails. In 2023, the Empire passes circulated from the library more than 2,000 times, with activity at every member library in the system. Today, we'll hear a review of Thicker Than Water, a memoir by Kerry Washington. Award-winning actor, director, producer, and activist, Kerry Washington details her life-changing experience when her identity was unexpectedly shattered. Comedian Trevor Noah, author of Born a Crime, says Kerry Washington's book takes a compassionate sledgehammer to the facades that so many of us create about ourselves and our families. Our presenter today is Kristen Walker. Founder and curator at Noir Reading Room, Kristen Walker, who uses the pronouns she and they, is a Rochester-based cultural worker that uplifts the works of Black women and femmes. Please join me in joining Kristen Walker to our podium and in thanking her for stepping in to give this review when our originally scheduled speaker had an unavoidable conflict. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks so much for being here. Shout out to Susan and the foundation for having this program that's been going on for forever, like way longer than I've been alive, so that's awesome. I also want to shout out Katira, who couldn't be here today, but she is also a partner in this work of cultural and book and literacy work here in Rochester, so shout out to her. I'm Kristen Walker from here, as we already know, and I love the public library. I remember just coming here as a kid and going up to the secret rooms as it's evolved over the years, and when you go up there now, it's like a whole different experience, so I really enjoy being here, and the work that I do is I started a nonprofit because I was really tired of getting fired from other nonprofits. And so I was like, I'll do this myself. And so I've been doing this work for almost 10 years, out here doing the work of urban agriculture and literacy here in the city of Rochester. And our goal is to make reading engagement fun and accessible for all folks. And I do that by focusing on authors that are not normally on other shelves. Like the library has a lot of books on the shelves, but when you step outside the library, access and accessibility for other texts aren't there. And so it's so awesome that I'm reviewing this book by Kerry Washington because it fits into my brand and what I already do. So yeah, we're just gonna get into it. So when Katira reached out to me and said, do you want to do this? I said, I didn't watch Scandal like that, and I don't really know much about Kerry Washington. And so in reading this memoir, I was able to learn more about her and then make connections to myself and to the world. So I just want to share a little bit about those things. So the book is titled Thicker Than Water. And so the quote that comes from, or the full quote, is that the blood of the covenant is thicker than the water of the womb. And I'm like, I knew the quote already, but it's because of her search for identity and self in this book that title makes a lot of sense, and the connection to that quote makes sense too. So again, and not being a super fan or having followed Kerry Washington's work altogether, it was like a breath of fresh air to read this book. I'm not a memoir person, but I also have finished Worthy this year by Jada Pinkett Smith, so I guess I've been reading celebrity memoirs, and I'm taking some time to think about my connection to celebrity altogether. I would rather know more about the folks in this room than these folks that are on TV and stuff like that. It seems way further than the actual connections I want to make in community and with my neighbors. So this is encouragement for everybody to write a book so that we can get to know different folks in a more community-based level, because that's the work that I do. So anyways, as an actor, we've seen her on Scandal. We've seen her in Save the Last Dance. We've seen her different places. And so we're just going to get more into the book now, I guess, chapter by chapter. There's 13 chapters in this book. And by chapter 5, I'm like, okay, this is a book I definitely want to finish. Slow at first, but she does a lot of leading up to finding out her secret, her internal secret or whatever like that. Can I give spoilers here? Or? You're in charge. Oh, there may be some spoilers in this conversation, but still feel free to pick up the book from the library, of course. So Kerry Washington is from New York City, and as a fellow New Yorker, there were points in the story where I was like, okay, we can relate to at least having a New York identity. She's from the Bronx, and she quotes that she met and interacted with Jennifer Lopez, so they lived in the similar community or same community. And I'm like, oh, wow, check that out. The Bronx was bringing us a lot of greats from that area. Kudos to them. And so she's an only child, and so I think only child syndrome is evident through this book. Do we have any only children in here? Okay, so what only child syndrome means for the rest of us is if you're the center of your family's attention, then you are used to being the center of attention. You may not know how to do certain things because you just didn't have to. For instance, her mom, because she was the only child, she didn't teach her chores and things like that, and she goes over that in the book. She's in college, and they're go press this dress in the theater department, and she goes to press on it. And then she's like, what am I doing? And so then her mother has a conversation with her no, I didn't want to burden you with chores. I wanted you to live your life. And I wish my mom would have had that same kind of, oh, you know my mom. My mom did not have and does not have that understanding at all. And so it was okay, I can see how being an only child or being the center of her family's attention leads her to be a star because she's used to being that person. And then I just laughed, girl, not you in college and don't know how to iron. But yeah, that was her experience. That's not my experience. She talks a little bit about her childhood and growing up. And so in chapter 4, there's mention of sexual assault that happens to her as a child, and she doesn't know what to do with that. And connecting to that experience and story, it's like, what do you do with that? And her family is a family of color, a black family, and I think that secrets or like not telling or not talking about certain things is a normalized experience. And so she talks about her silencing in that moment, and then she revisits that moment near the end of the book, to further investigate like what she would have done or could have done in that moment. But because she was silent in the initial part, she carries that with her. And so she, like her mother and her father, go through life carrying these heavy, heavy secrets that don't really have a place or a time to like be okay to talk about. But she's doing it in this book. And so we get to know all of these like inner knowings about her. One part of this book and of her story that also stuck out to me was the fact that she was privately educated. So she went to the Spence School in New York City, and when I researched the Spence School, the current tuition right now is $63,000 a year, and what an investment for your child's education, right? Because this is before they go to college. And so she's in an environment that she doesn't necessarily come from or fit into, but she still is granted privileges from being in that space. So in chapter 5, it's a chapter called Agency, and she talks about what these initial experiences and encounters with privilege were like for her. And I just thought that was so reminiscent of times where I didn't know how the world worked outside of my bubble that I had been raised in, and then how outside of that it's just like a very different world. So I'm going to read a couple quotes that talk more about the privilege and her experience of that privilege while being at the Spence School. So at Pugsley Avenue, our apartment was one of 10 on the 12th floor. To arrive at 12D required a long walk down a hallway lit from above with unforgiving fluorescent fixtures. In contrast, I will never forget the first time I stood in the elevator of a large doorman building on Fifth Avenue and had the doors slide open into a grand apartment that took up the entire floor. At first, I felt bewildered. How could this be? Then betrayed. How did I not know it was even possible to live like this? Then resentful. Why don't I know anyone who lives like this? And then finally enraged. Why does it seem that no one who lives like this looks like me? And so in that questioning and in that passage that she writes here, I just really sat with that moment, and sat with the experience of like, oh, I didn't even know what I didn't know, because it's not part of my experience. And though it seems so fantastical to have these experiences of having a apartment on the floor, what was she talking about? Is she talking about just having security and having a home, or is she talking about being afforded more luxuries that she wasn't experiencing? And so I thought that was just really something. So she starts acting also around this time that she's in Spence School, and the Spence School provides her with connections that get her further in her acting career without having to go through some of the normalized things you have to do. So like cold calling, auditioning, like she didn't have to do that because she had a connection from somebody in the school. And so she says that she was learning what privilege looked like. And I think in that learning what it looked like, she was also grappling with what it feels like to be a privileged person or to experience privileges based on your social location, which is what was happening at Spence School. She was on scholarship there, as she also mentions, and her mother was a school teacher, so there's that. Oh, what I mean is that her mother was a school teacher in New York City, and so then her wages would not have supported her going to that school without the addition of the financial aid, and so then she was afforded just different opportunities from that. And so I started talking about only child syndrome, and I started there because she just have a lot of internal dialogue and just, I guess, a lot of time and space to have independent thoughts without like a little brother or sister coming to bother you or anything like that. So that was interesting to go through that. I'm a middle child, and so I'm the peanut butter and jelly, of course, my house. But as an only child, I could see the benefits in that too. Her parents struggled with having her. Her mother experienced a stillborn before she conceived Kerry, and that was a topic of conversation throughout this book. Was like the mom definitely had a stillborn, and that was a known thing. But when it came to how Kerry Washington got to be, it was just more silence and reservation. And that silence and reservation is really just, how do you talk about reproductive health? How do you talk about reproductive challenges in life, or even with people that you love? Like, if you're not experiencing it or haven't experienced it, you may not even understand what it's like or how to hold space for folks. And so having the mother be open about the stillborn process or that experience, but not go into Kerry Washington's big secret, which I'm trying to save the spoiler, but we'll probably get the spoiler of the big secret soon. I wonder what choice the mother made in that. Like, was it protection and security for Kerry to not disclose the truth? Is it a connection to her husband to not disclose the truth? Like, who wants to be in the light in that moment? And then mom was just holding on to that. And her mother also, like, has multiple bouts of cancer. And so I think about the manifestations of, like, those secrets, and how holding on to, like, stuff like poison or things that you can share, how it manifests on the inside in some type of illness or sickness like that. And that's not to say that all of it is connected to that. I'm just saying, like, holding on to these big secrets for so long. Kerry Washington is 47 currently, and she found out at age like 43 her big secret. And so holding that as a parent, I think, is also a lot to do. And we experience the disconnection that she feels with her parents because she knows that something's different or not right, but they're not saying anything. Like, they're just not saying anything about it. What was funny to me in this book, like one of the only funny parts in this book for me, was her crimes that she talked about. One of her crimes on page 112 and 113 is not returning a library book, and I also have committed that crime back in the day. Not now, of course, but like when I was a kid. Sometimes the book got lost. Sometimes you just really loved it and wanted to hold on to it. The book that she wanted to love and hold on to is called A New You. And yeah, I thought that was really funny that she included that in there. And for me, a library kid and a person who really loves the library, like, sometimes we just like take books sometimes, but it's not on the library. It's just like sometimes we just need that book. But don't do that now. I'm saying, like, back in the day, and she was also a kid. She's like, that's her first crime, was getting this book and not returning it. But she's like, I'd pay all the fines now because now she can. Now she has money from being an actor for all this time. I talked about privilege, only child syndrome. Oh, ancestry. Ancestry is also a theme in this book that I also connect to my mother. There's a genealogy floor here. Yes. So my mom used to bring me there. She's our family archivist and our genealogist. She has the story. She has the obituary. She has all the things. I was here at this library looking at microfiche and trying to figure things out. And so as Kerry Washington is going down this independent path of trying to figure out her ancestry, I just was so thankful that my mom had brought me with her, you know, on her own journey for self and looking for our ancestry and trying to connect those dots. It's not easy. It is not easy, but we continue to work on it. And so in this book, Kerry Washington is also doing that. And I'm like, oh my goodness, do we have things in common? I started the book, or started this whole conversation, like, I'm not a Kerry Washington fan necessarily, but finding the similarities made this book a good read for me. And able to do this conversation and talk with y'all today. So, yeah, the ancestry part was just really something because as a black person in America, ancestry is already difficult. It's more difficult when you factor in the reproductive struggles that her mother was going through at that time. So, spoiler alert, her dad is not her dad, and they don't know the donor because the doctor had found a guy and worked it out. And as of right now, and we can still Google it right now, she still does not know who her father is, her biological father. And so the mystery of her whole existence is something, it's like, oh, she was destined to be a star, right? She was destined to be here no matter what, regardless of the challenges that were going on, regardless of who the donor is or is not. Like, she's here and she has something to say, and she's like, I feel like influenced our culture and influenced media in a way that we can still talk about. And so that's very interesting. So that quest for searching for self continued to come up, and she likens it to the roles that she was actually being offered and what she had actually been doing. And when she paralleled it, I said, oh, this kind of makes sense, how she puts the journey together. She played a person that had reproductive issues. She had played a person who was the parent. And so then she had a different role. She can like step into her mother's shoes and say like, okay, as an actor, this is what I'm doing. And that's like art imitating life imitating art, like whichever way that was going at that time. And I just thought that was really something, because the journey, I'm under 40, so my journey is not complete yet, but all of the pieces somehow still fit all together, even though in the moments I don't always feel like they fit together. But when you look back on it, it's like, oh, this did lead to this, and it all makes sense, and we can make sense of it. And this is what she's doing in Thicker Than Water, is making sense of that journey. She talks less, I feel like, about her acting roles or like how she shows up as an actor, but she does talk about her methods. She really studied acting, the craft, and she went to India to learn more about that craft, and so that was really something. When she went to India, she thought she was going to be painting green face. It's a specific name for them, but it's escaping me right now. But what ends up happening is that she gets closer to God, and that's what she said. She thought she would be on stage doing these things, but it was in the practice of learning to fight and in the practice of yoga, which is what they were doing there, that she get closer to herself and then come back to the States after that. Oh, and that gave me a nod to like studying abroad, how that's important for just exposure to different cultures and different experiences across the world that you wouldn't necessarily have if you stay at home, in your school, in your community. She worked with the Obamas on the arts, and so I thought that was interesting because I didn't know that she was politically active or involved, because Scandal just gave me a fantastical imagination, as it were. And so then to know that she was actually doing things was refreshing. Chapter 13 through the end of the book, I thought was just what we had been waiting for, and that the question that she started asking on page 12 got answered on page 253. And I noted that because I had to circle it to be like, wait, girl, I was waiting on you to get back to this point. So yes, so from 12 to page 253, we get a lot of story and we get a lot of character development, but the answer to the big question of this Thicker Than Water doesn't come till chapter 13. So I don't know, that was a lot for me, because I was like, girl, go earlier, like tell me earlier. I was emailing Katira, the person who was supposed to be here, like, girl, is it her dad or is it not her dad? Because she asked the question so early in the book, and it's just so late in the book where we actually get the answer. And so, I mean, I had to keep reading, and so she accomplished that goal and kept me reading. But it was just a lot of suspense for, I feel like, no reason. So, yeah, her dad is not her dad. And the dad has like this cognitive dissonance toward that, because he doesn't acknowledge it in ways in which that, from my perspective, like women can acknowledge if they've had miscarriages or things like that. Like his ability to accept and name what he was going through doesn't come up in the book, and I'm not sure if it comes up in her life either. Does he ever sit with his own reproductive struggles, and is there community for him to like be in in those struggles. And I don't know, because I want there to be community for everybody, but I understand that silence keeps us from community, because if we're not talking about it or not open, then we can't build community. We can't show up for each other or hold space for each other. And so that's just one of my like noticings and wonderings of the book, is like how do men deal with their own reproductive struggles, and what is the space like for them? Because here, the dad took a test, and it's like, Dad, you know it's not your kid, but he still took a DNA test, and it came back 0.1%. It's not your kid. But so he still goes through with that, and I wonder what's behind that, because I feel like he knows, him and the mother know, because they've had the secret this whole time about Kerry's paternity, but never say anything about it. And so those are just things, more thoughts that I had about that part. So then there's a show on PBS where the guy does your ancestry, and so she wants to be on that show, and so that's when she has to talk to her parents about, hey, this is all going to come up, will you take a test? And then they first say no, and then they go back and say yes. And so, I mean, I don't know. But what she does say about the father, who has been her father regardless of paternity, is that she chooses him in the same ways that her children chose her. And so she appreciates, I feel like, appreciates this relationship, even though it's been a strained relationship through the course of this book as she presents it to us. And I'll read this quote from page 280. What is clear to me now is that I chose my dad. I didn't choose my donor as the man to raise me. I didn't choose his family. I chose my mom and dad. I chose this life and these lessons. Even though at times it's been painful, I can now see the beauty in all of it. This life and these parents have made me exactly who I am, and I would not change a thing. And so having that reflection and putting this in the book, like closer to the end, I think is a great summation of her journey in writing this book, doing the research for this book, and also reflecting on her own life. Chapter 1 is her at the end of the taping of Scandal, and somebody's asking her, like, what are you going to do next? And so she writes this book. But it's not as simple, or it's not a linear thing that happens. I think that she reflects on her journey and then gives us this book as a memoir, but I think also just to show us that, one, how you start is not how you finish, and also, like, there's beauty in our struggles, and I think that the story of her parents is just beautiful to me, because they make beauty in who is Kerry Washington out of their struggles, out of the unnamed pain, out of all the things they were going through. And I just really love that. She mentions Disney in this book, as she says that she's like a Disney person. And the Disney movie that came up for me was Moana. It's a newer Disney movie, but it's a water-based movie. And one thing Moana says is we are voyagers, and her being in water, and she's a swimmer, so that's also a theme in this water trope that's happening all around. And so she says is that we're water people, including her father, because her father is the one who she swims with. And so this intimate connection in the water is fueled in some way by the presence and parenting of her dad. And I just think that's so beautiful. I'm also a daddy's girl, so I just really like that there was a nod to that. And then, yes, in some ways, I can identify with her feeling robbed about not knowing earlier, but I just want to say the beauty is there, and that's why we get the book. And beauty, pain, it makes good reading. And so, yeah, we're voyagers. She loves the water. It's a lot to learn, I feel like, in your 40s that you don't know who you think you were. But to end this conversation and get into some discussion, I'm going to read 309, which is, it's 310 pages of writing, so 309 is the very end. Kerry is what my mother chose. Washington is my dad. Osagma is her married name, and I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that right, is my future, and Marissa belongs to me, and Marissa is her middle name. And I love that she does that. Self-naming is a tenet of like womanist principles, and so in naming yourself and in claiming your identity, I would love to see her in the street and say like, hey Marissa, like what's up? Because I think that's her truest self. And all these other versions that we know, are for public consumption. But I think at the heart of it, she's Marissa, and she's able to get to that naming and that self-naming practice after experiencing all things that she did, including that big jump up in her 40s, finding out that's not her dad. And so that's my talk. Thanks so much, and let's get into some questions.